and a and a council member at the Pacific Sociological Association. And as I mentioned, we're fortunate to have Professors Darby Southgate and Catherine Bolzendahl here today. I'll go ahead and introduce them and then give them each a bit of time to talk about their research, saving time for Q&A at the end. Dr. Darby Southgate is a professor of sociology and a member of the Academic Senate at Los Angeles Valley College. Dr. Southgate has taught for over 25 years and has been involved in applied sociology as a researcher since 1999, working for the Department of Health and Long Beach, conducting community-based research. Dr. Southgate's book, Inequality, A Contemporary Approach to Race, Class, and Gender, is in its second edition. Dr. Southgate has worked at Los Angeles Unified School District in research and planning, as well as for marketing firms and nonprofit organizations. She continues to apply her research skills to investigate topics of stratification, education, and culture. Today's talk, Reifying Social Constructions of Gender, Durability of Power Relations. She's going to focus on class systems of sex and gender. They shift quickly through the rise of technology and immediate global communication. As these classification systems change, so do the ideologies surrounding the means ascribed to sex and gender. With groups changing binary classifications, do power relations respond, or is it inequality inevitable? Next up, we will have Catherine Bolzendahl, professor of sociology and director of the School of Public Policy at Oregon State University. Her research examines gender and sexuality, equality in politics, policy, and family contexts. In addition to her peer-reviewed articles, previous co-authored books examined women's global political empowerment and Americans' definitions of family. In today's talk, she will focus on different and equal gendered patterns of political participation. Political engagement is often seen as a man's world, but recent patterns in women's and men's political engagement challenge that assumption. Women vote as much as or more than men, and women often engage in politics differently than men, not less than. What can we learn from such findings to better understand the future political power in the US and Europe? Can politics evolve beyond patriarchal systems? And how is women's political empowerment reflecting that shift? Each speaker will have 15 minutes, and then we'll open up. We'll have time for Q&A. So I will go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Darby Southgate.
Thank you so very much for that warm welcome. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting us both here. Let me start my slideshow and let's start up. As you mentioned, when I wrote this book, one of my questions was, as we're changing these categories or challenging these categories of sex and gender, I'm really interested in how power relations respond to that. And I think the title of my talk today gives us a bit of a hint as to what I found, that we reify social constructions of gender and that power relations ultimately are durable. And for those that don't know what reifying means, it's making something real that is not real. So Thomas' theorem back in the 60s suggested that if we claim something to be real, it becomes real by its consequences. And so that sort of gives us a hint as to what I found in the research that I did. So just quickly, a little base starting point for us. Gender. What is gender? Well, gender is literally assigned to sex. It's a host of behaviors, expectations, of social norm displays. Specifically, we often see it as two mutually exclusive, that the two shall never meet in terms of masculine and feminine behaviors. If you notice the pictures I've chosen on the right, I'm obsessed with these gender reveal parties. Nothing speaks to me more about the assigning of gender than something that matters so much to society that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, of course, capitalism, right? Where we want to let the society know, everyone in the family, all our friends, all our social media contacts, everybody needs to know the sex of the new child and what that's going to mean before the child's even brought into the world. So what does that do? Well, ultimately, gender creates a stratification system and becomes an institution that structures every aspect of our lives, maybe more so than any other social status. So I'm going to talk quickly. I know I'm going to talk really quick today about how it's embedded in all the social structures: the family, education, workplace, the state, voting, sexuality, language, and culture. So ultimately, we know that gender can be experienced. It can also be a status, right? It can be ascribed, it can be achieved, and formally, it can be displayed, which is how society and us react back and forth to that. So we often hear the phrase gender roles. I prefer gendered roles because gender roles assumes that it's innate, that it's natural. So what are these gendered roles? There's again social expectations that are attached to the sexes. But we know most people don't fit neatly into these two-dimensional classifications. I'm only feminine, he's only masculine. That doesn't even make sense, particularly when we start understanding that there's different ways of classifying ourselves within different sexual categories. So where do we know about this sociologically speaking? A very famous sociologist named Harold Garfinkel in the early 1960s. He was the very first American sociologist to study what today we call as somebody transitioning. So he studied Agnes, a female who was transitioning to become female. And it wasn't enough, as Garfinkel noted, for Agnes to change her body. So the sex was being challenged in terms of what she felt. But it was more important that she figured how to, as we symbolic interactionists would say, do femininity. Because again, we're ascribing gender to sex. So what did Garfinkel tell us that I think will help us understand this? This is what Garfinkel quoted. He says, Agnes learned to display herself only to her partner, not to insist on having her own way, offer her opinions, or demand equality with men. So part of what we're seeing here is that the gendered display of femininity really links to a subordinated status. And I think that's going to help us understand this talk. So moving us closer to today, 2016, some really great sociologists compared heterosexual couples with homosexual couples. So this is really talking about how does gender inequality get embedded in our family. And what we find and what we would expect is that in heterosexual couples, there's a traditional gender role. Female chores are distinguished from male chores. Way too much to read on the slide, but let me summarize that generally women are ascribed things like cooking, cleaning the house, buying groceries, cooking food. What are men ascribed to? Masculine duties, things like automotive maintenance, as if anybody does that anymore, and outdoor chores, take out the trash. When it started coming down to the actual children and childcare, of course, the majority of respondents said, that's woman's work. The only time a man was ascribed a childcare task was in regards to discipline. Again, hearkening back to that social construction of masculine and feminine. So ultimately, it didn't matter what social class these couples were or what their interests or hobbies were, that endurable level of power distributed at the family level speaks to where we are today. So how did homosexual couples fare? The exact same patterns. So obviously we're dealing with same-sex couples, but when the couple could determine which person was more feminine or more masculine, that person was assigned those exact same roles that we saw in heterosexual couples. The majority of feminine tasks, cooking, cleaning, childcare, masculine tasks, take care of the car, take out the trash. There was less significance in terms of discipline, but again, we're a stay-home parent, but we do see this sort of echoing or mirroring of the gendered roles even in homosexual couples. So where does this stuff come from? Sociology is quick to point out this phrase hegemony or gendered hegemony. So what's hegemony? It's the political creation. And let me back up and say, whenever we talk about politics in sociology, we're really talking about power. So it's the political creation and maintenance of dominance by one group over another within a social structure that makes the power relation seem natural. It's really important. It makes this look natural. This is a really old word, this hegemony, and the hegemon being the power source, started in the ancient Greeks. We've seen many sociologists talk about it. Antonio Gramsci, if those are interested in reading about hegemon in culture, and also Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse talked a lot about this. So we can look at these two advertisements and see exactly what I'm talking about. These are hegemonic images. These are real advertisements. We see the Dolce & Gabbana ad at the top, and then we see a Ford motor car advertisement at the bottom. And how we portray men are masculine. What does that mean? We can see using like sort of a Goffman 1979 advertising analysis that it really has to do with being in control, being independent, being strong. And how do we show portrayals of women? Feminine, which links to beautiful companions, emotional, weak, in need of protection, and vulnerable. I'll promise you, I've never figured out what Dolce& and Gabbana is advertising in this actual advertisement, aside from male dominance. And again, with Ford Motor Car, I think we have something very common within these two ads, is that through these hegemonic gendered images, we really lean into this idea of fetished violence. And this is just part of how hegemony creates female subordination and male domination. So where does this stuff come from? Well, we got to look to some of the great conflict theorists. Frederick Engels, he was the writing partner of Karl Marx. Karl, interestingly enough, never really talked about female subordination in societies. He was very much a class analyst. But Engels gave us sort of the definitive sociological writing of this. And he says he notices female subordination was really in the material relations of society. Well, that makes sense. He's a materialist, right? He's not an idealist. So he thinks that all the social relations of the material world inform how our world is. And so he notices a trend across the different groups that he studied. He says the minute we get extra stuff, surplus, be it land, farming tools, property, all of a sudden it becomes important who owns what. So if I die, who gets my stuff? Well, I'm a woman. I wasn't allowed to own land. So if someone, like, let's say I was married and my husband passed away and I'm the only heir, I would have that land. So what happens when I die? Well, the church would take it. So, of course, this is American European history. So without DNA, we would not know who the rightful heir is. And this is where Engels notices that female subordination is. It's through marriage that we become properties of our husbands. And if we don't have a husband, the church, the ultimate patriarch, would take over our property. So this is where we see gender roles really benefiting cisgender masculine men. In our book, I talk a lot about all the different institutions, like even having children. Women used to be help other women have children, but then we moved into medical schools. Now women weren't allowed to attend a medical school, so then it became illegal for women to help women have babies because you needed to have a medical degree. So all of this starts helping us understand this hegemonic subordination. So we're going to hear a lot of counter oppositions to this idea that women have been subordinated. A lot of people talk about the fact that it's natural, that somehow women are just the weaker sex. My goodness, not so. This is more hegemony. So I just want to briefly talk about some of the social structures where we see this hegemonic relationship being bolstered and maintained. Ancient Greek, we find these all throughout religions. We have ancient Greek, the stories of Pandora. We often hear about Pandora's box. Okay, it was really a jar, but when the jar broke, all the evils of the world were let loose because of why? Some woman, she cursed us. Judeo-Christian myths. Boy, we've got Lilith and Adam. Lilith didn't subordinate to Adam, so she got kicked out and became a demon. And then, of course, the Adam and Eve myth, which, again, Eve didn't do the one thing she was told, don't eat the fruit. She ate the fruit, so what happens? We drop from the kingdom, right? Now we're destined to a life of hell. And for that, women, we get the dubious honor of having birth pain, which we're not supposed to get rid of because the original sin. So we also see a really beautiful treatise that fights this idea by Katie Stanton. She actually looks at how the Christianity uses that idea of original sin to make women look weak and guilty of all the ills in our world. Again, this speaks to our hegemony. We see the Puritans, the American colonizers, my goodness, witch trials, right? If a woman had any sort of power in her world, particularly women who were healers, they were being challenged and at best were challenged by society members as witches, at worst tortured and murdered for their desire to have power in their own world. We've seen all of this even reified through scholars and scientists. We have this idea that the menstrual cycle somehow causes derangement and hysteria. I'm in Los Angeles today, and it's Dodger Day. I'm going to challenge that as hysteria and dementia as something else that maybe isn't just ascribed to menstrual cycles, maybe menstrual cycles as well. But because of this idea of the menstrual cycle being so bizarre to men, that they've literally created laws against us. Doing things that the average person would do. So because of our blood loss, they would say we couldn't learn, so we couldn't go to schools. We couldn't ride trains. They literally said that the blood was being sucked out of our brain because the trains were going so fast. And ultimately, we couldn't vote. They couldn't allow us to vote because if we demanded the vote, we were labeled mentally ill, institutionalized and even lobotomized, right? They would actually cut parts of our frontal lobes out because we dare demand the vote. So we see this in the state. Of course, women demanded the right to vote. And today we're still fighting the right to control reproduction. One of the phrases that keeps looping in my mind through this really heated election, I understand that people have very, very strong feelings about abortion, but unless we have control over our reproduction, this is a time when 1 in 3 women in America can be raped, and their rapist has the right to choose the mother of his children. And we also know that more than half of the states in America, men have paternity rights to their children. So if a female is raped and has a child, that rapist has legal rights to that child. Think this is problematic. So just quickly going back to some of my research, some good news is we're seeing female and male so inequality is sort of morphing. There is some changes. We see females on average earning more college degrees, and that's going to link women to more power because obviously we live in a capitalist society and income is earned by working. So we see associates, bachelor's, and master's degree. Females have the advantage, but we don't see that advantage in professional degrees and doctoral degrees. That can be worrisome because that's where the big return on our investments are. So I dug a little deeper because I thought this was interesting. So those jobs that we tell young women particularly to take, those STEM jobs, right? Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, those have the worst returns in terms of gender inequality built into wages. So the histogram on the right looks at the wage gap percentage. So if a woman and a man in the same position with the same education and the same work experience earned the same, that would be 100%. There would be no wage gap. So the bigger, the lower the number, the more wage gap there is. And if you notice these are the top 11, I think I did 11, awkward number, of institutions jobs or industries that are the worst for women in terms of our wage gap inequality. And if you look at them and sort of stand back and say, what are they? They're majority what were considered masculine jobs. Things like working in commodities, securities, and financial, right? Things like the stock market jobs. We only make 64 cents for a man's dollar. Physicians and surgeons don't return. We see real estate brokers, financial managers, and ultimately police and sheriff are not earning a dollar to a dollar. So these are jobs that we tell particularly college students that these are the best jobs for particularly women to get to sort of even out that inequality, but we're not seeing that actually happen. This is, again, an example of the reification. And when I dug down a little further into that wage gap, right, if it was $1 for $1, there would be no gap. Notice here on this graphic, I looked at it by age. So looking at women to men, the closest we can get, and this is a time analysis from it's actually to 2022, but that's okay. We notice that women are just not making very much money compared to men, but the closest to parity, the closest to equality is in the 16 to 24-year-old group. When you're 16 to 24, you're probably not in your career. You're probably in your entry-level position or maybe working that other job while you're doing something else. Maybe starting a family, maybe just, starting college. As we get older, notice that gap gets bigger. This is the group, the 55 to 64 group that I'm very concerned about when I see this analysis. What I see here is that this is the group where we're in our career. This is the group where we're hopefully able to retire and getting ready to retire. And obviously our lifetime earnings influence what we earn in our older age. So we notice that at this level, women are only making 76 cents to a man's dollar on average. To me, that's very worrisome. So as a woman ages, our incomes go lower. And obviously, as I said, young women have the highest wages. And we know that patriarchy values young women. Older women become problematic to patriarchy. So I wanted to go a little bit further and look at LGBTQ plus groups, because again, patriarchy would suggest that cisgender masculine men would do well. So I looked at all workers compared to these groups, as you see. What did I find? All LGBTQ plus workers earned 10% less. Trans men and non-binary, non-conforming earned 30% less, and trans women earned 40% less. So clearly we can see that this is a reification of gendered roles. We know that there's many challenges to patriarchy. I think many of us are smashing patriarchy daily. But the word feminist, what I like to call the other F word, is really challenged, particularly with that red pill group, those of you who are the internet social media groups that are very anti-feminine and misogynistic. I think we all know that the 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote, but I don't know that many of us understand that it took 60 years for all the states to ratify that. It wasn't until 1984 when Mississippi finally buckled in and said, okay, we'll go ahead and sign that too. So we see voter suppression even when women were granted the right. I hate that word granted, when women earned or fought for the right to vote. And voter suppression really falls most particularly on African American women due to state, county laws, policies, and local traditions. Um, I know that many of us talk about what have we won? Well, we fought and won for these. In 1938, the woman was arrested here in Los Angeles. She went to trial to just as a witness for a burglary, and the judge said, "You shouldn't wear slacks. It's distracting." And she said, "But I'm comfortable." He actually made her go home, and she came back and said, "I don't want to wear a dress. I don't feel comfortable in a dress." She came back and he put her in jail for 5 days for wearing slacks. So it wasn't until 1938 till that was challenged. So if you're wearing pants or slacks today, then you can thank Helen Gerlich for that. Serving on juries. Can you imagine being trying to be judged by your peers when none of the peers are actually women? We didn't have opportunities to get credit or a credit card. We would have to have a male family member, a husband or a father, come in and co-sign for us. We didn't have any workplace sexual harassment. We could be fired for being pregnant. And of course, anytime our husbands wanted to rape us, they were allowed to because there was no law in the books until 1993 that protected us from that. We couldn't serve in the front line of militaries. And today we're still controlling our reproduction. We're still having that fight. So again, we're seeing women dying in states because they're not having access to basic health care. So finally, in my last slide, so 81-year-old, this is a headline in a newspaper, 81-year-old Georgia woman's husband never let her vote. He died last year and she just cast her first ballot. I don't want to be crass here, but hallelujah for that, right? So Betty Cartledge, she was actually with her niece and they interviewed her, but I want us to sort of think about this hegemonic relationship as internal and external. Let's look at the quote. This is her rationale why she said she never voted before. She said, "I was so young and everything when we got married. I never really thought about it. And then I got old and I thought that it wouldn't count to vote. And then I got old and I thought that it wouldn't count to vote." Right? So here she is talking about the fact that she didn't think she mattered. Her voice didn't matter, and that ultimately she allowed her husband to make her decisions for her. So I think I've made a case that hegemony is still around, and indeed we do see those power structures embedded. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a wonderful background to give us some ideas of thinking about inequalities and hegemony and how that comes into play as we start the stage for what happens with our political engagement and how does it become this man's world. So wonderful setup. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Catherine Bolzendahl. And as I mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So without further ado.
Great, thank you. There we go. Everybody can see that? Thumbs up? Yes, okay. So that was wonderful. It really lays the stage for me to talk about some of the work I've been doing. So, is politics a man's world? And so I'm looking at that through some of the research that I've done in terms of patterns in gendered political engagement. And so the question really underlying some of the recent work I've been involved in is, how do women and men participate as democratic political citizens? So as Darby left us off with, this wonderful experience of this woman who cast her first ballot at 81, it's just crucial in terms of forwarding our democracy, that people are politically engaged and feel that their vote counts, that their voice counts, and that they have a way to express that. Now, one of the things that we've seen in the literature and in research for many, many years and decades is this idea that women are just not as engaged as men, that somehow, and even it's kind of going back to maybe some of these hegemonic ideas that maybe women just don't care as much, like they're just not, and almost like questioning their right or ability to do that engagement. And so, findings would report that women were not voting as much, or not, doing all of these other political things that they should be doing. And so myself and my colleague Hilda Coffey, when we've been looking at this, we find a little bit of a different picture when we look at this. It's not the enduring gap in gender participation. It's a different story. Instead, what we really find and what we really argue is that women and men are engaging differently. Now, many men and women are doing the same kinds of activities, but where there are differences, it's not just about inequality, it's about different choices of how to engage and how to get your voice across. So, to sum up, kind of, we're seeing that women are engaging more so in this, what we might call a private or a more individualistic way of pursuing activism. Also things that tend to support the community, but in fairly recent years, voting. So women are voting as much, if not more so, than men. And in contrast, we're seeing men kind of engage in these more kind of public forms of engagement, like patterns of demonstrating more, of making their voice heard, of posting things, of contacting politicians, things that require a lot more resources. And as Darby was outlining, women and men often have different access to resources, different responsibilities within the home that can make some of these other types of, even just running for office or attending a political meeting or something much more challenging, childcare, for example. So, so we do see these differences in how women and men are engaging. And so then the question is why? So I've alluded to some of that, and as Darby really nicely illustrated, gender is socially constructed through all of these forces. We develop gendered identities and how we think of ourselves and what matters to us. But it's not just our own identity and how we decide that we are going to identify as a woman or man or non-binary or genderqueer. It's also the fact that we exist in a society that defines gender in this way, in these often binary ways, and has expectations that we're held accountable to. So when we violate those expectations, we can be punished by those around us, by society. And this plays out in politics. We learn our political roles from an early age through the images we see, through the things that we're told. Think about the little girls and boys who are watching the news right now and some of the things that are said. Vote now and you'll never have to vote again. You should be looking at the barrel of a gun in order to, to Liz Cheney about making statements. And this starts early, and it's a learning process. So there's research that tracked how little girls and little boys draw and talk about political leaders. When they're 6 years old, little girls are mostly drawing women leaders, and little boys are mostly drawing men. Women leaders and boys, men leaders. By the time they're 12, boys and girls are all mostly drawing men as leaders. So they've accomplished that. They've learned what politics is. And so that's part of this idea that how do you do politics? Who does institutional politics? We're taught about that. And this also then ties to maybe some of these participatory differences because we develop different democratic priorities based on how we understand how the world works. So women tend to emphasize more than men civil and social responsibilities. So some of these choices in how to engage are in terms of that women view citizenship as not just, the political responsibilities, but especially more so the responsibility to each other as a community, to being a good community member, taking care of others, caring about others, making sure that the laws are equally applied to one another, and that really putting a great deal of emphasis on rights. And so when Hansen and Gonega, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, talked about that, they said, this is really about women are trying to kind of deconstruct gendered power asymmetries through direct participation or and also just trying to subvert them by really emphasizing these rights that, you have to break down the traditional power by really emphasizing the equality in people's rights. And so those are some of the reasons why we might see some of these patterns. And so my colleague and I did a kind of deep dive. We had 20 years of data, 26 different nations, and 8 different types of engagement. And indeed, we find kind of this is just kind of a bivariate finding, that you see women are more likely to sign petitions, to boycott products. They're less likely to demonstrate, to work for a party, to post politically online, and to contact politicians. There's no difference between men and women in voting. So we were interested in kind of digging into that and knowing, can we explain these gaps away? And we can look at inequalities in levels and effects of resources, thinking about those socioeconomic differences, but also political resources like political interest, political trust, these kind of things. So we took that into account in our models. And one of the things that we found is we saw some changes. Once you control for all of that, women are actually more likely to vote than men. Women are more likely to display campaign materials. They remain more likely to petition and boycott regardless of controls. We cannot shake the fact that men are more likely to contact politicians or political figures or to work for a party or political organization. But the gap between demonstrating and posting politically online, it disappears once we control for all that. So it tells us that these inequalities are still mattering, and especially political interest. So when we control for the fact that women are less politically interested, that's when we see the big change. And I think that has a lot to do with what I was talking about earlier, how men and women actually view politics. So am I interested in this? Well, it depends on what I think this politics actually is, right? And context really matters. So if you live in a country where women have a lot of political, economic, and social empowerment, what that creates is greater participation for everyone. So it's good for everyone. Women's equality is good for everyone, but even especially a bigger boost for women. So I'm just going to illustrate that with a couple graphs here. Here is the trend in signing petitions, right? And you see with higher levels of women in parliament, you see that upward trajectory. Both men and women are more likely to sign petitions when there's more political empowerment for women. But this is an even sharper rise for women. So it's good for everyone, especially good for women. Same thing, for example, in posting online. So bivariate, it looked like men do more of that. But when you take into account political interest, when you take into account context, you see that it has this upward trajectory for everyone, and this especially steep trajectory for women. So when we enable women's political, economic, and social equality, we're really helping with democracy writ large. So my good news, contrary to common narratives, women are not political laggards. They're out there, they're doing things. And gender equality is associated with more political participation for everyone, especially women. Women vote. And we know this, we're seeing the news, we're seeing it talks about women are out there voting, and often more than men. So in terms of the current US context, knowing that political interest matters a lot, and that women are less politically interested, it's something that we have to be concerned about. How do we make politics something that women care about and see themselves as being a part of? I think that some of the changes that we've seen in politics have helped women see how much it matters that they get involved and have a voice. We see that Republican campaigns that are tied to undermining women's political and economic empowerment, as outlined in Project 2025, terrible for democracy. It's an attack on democratic engagement for all of us, but especially women. And it's important to know that these patterns are really racially and ethnically stratified. So we know from research, for example, by Jane Jun and colleagues, that white women are kind of the anomaly. They tend to still have a majority of their vote go toward Republican candidates. It will be interesting to see what happens in the current election. And it's really been racial and ethnic minority women who are overwhelmingly supporting Democratic presidential candidates. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is some of the work by colleagues who are looking at this concept of gender-linked fate. How much do you think about what happens to you as being linked to what happens to women everywhere? And so I think, you know, especially for white women who see themselves more tied to white men who have typically benefited from the status quo, they haven't had less of this sense of linked fate. But as rights start getting chipped away, we can kind of see whether this effort that Kamala Harris' campaign has made to stoke a sense of gender-linked fate, what effect that has. I think we'll be studying the outcomes of this election for years to come. So brief high-level overview, and I'm happy to talk about this more in the Q&A. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for everyone sharing your work and some ideas, kind of give everyone a little bit more background in thinking about gender inequality and how this translates to politics and voting practices. I think the concept that we had with the gender linked fate and thinking about like the higher political empowerment scores, those really tie into me. And I think that's an interesting way. I hadn't put them together before like that. So thank you for sharing that. I want to go ahead and I have a couple of, I think there's a question in the chat, so I don't want to miss that because it didn't go into the Q&A. But let's go ahead and start. And if you haven't posted your questions in the Q&A yet, please feel free to. We are here to help learn more. One question is, do some women participate in the subordination of other women? If so, or if yes, how?
Gosh, I'm happy to take that. Yeah, that's part of hegemony. It makes it seem natural. So I'll tell you, I have a very good, close friend of mine. She's an actuary. For those that don't know what that is, it's the actual mathematicians that calculate the risks and set our insurance rates. And she was starting her first real job as an actuary in San Francisco. And she said, God, I don't know. I don't want to wear makeup anymore. I'm a feminist. I don't like using chemicals. I'm a vegan. And I just feel very uncomfortable with makeup. And it's my first day at the new job and I don't know what to do. And I said, don't wear makeup. You know, just don't wear makeup. It's that simple. And she told me that day, she came home and she said, you will never even believe this. Every female that worked as an actuary and that was in vice president positions or higher, none of them had makeup on. All the people that were in a lower status, all those women had makeup on. Now, I'm not judging women, but what I do see is this tendency for women to play into the gender roles because that's what we've been given from our very birth. And it really takes like a rugged individualism for us to sort of balk at those gendered roles. So we're always doing these supporting of hegemony. So women are always doing this. We do it to ourselves. And again, it just takes a really brave individual to kind of like to pull Mills into this, to actually see those what look like invisible forces. When we can see that and then make that decision as well, do I really want to wear makeup? And should I vote? Should I tell my partner what I'm voting for? These are questions that women have to apparently be strong to be able to answer. For some of us, it comes very naturally, but for others, we're socialized to feel this way. So yeah, women do this to ourselves all the time. Yeah.
I think picking up off that too is it's interesting because with gender, with other kind of minoritized statuses, we see more segregation, unfortunately. So, right, so we're often racially and ethnically segregated. In gender, often our lives are very intertwined. And so especially when groups are going back to kind of thinking about the materialistic benefits, right? So for white women, who continue to support Trump or support Project 2025. There are women authors who are part of Project 2025. I'm sure they see themselves as benefiting from that system. And in part because, you know, especially in heterosexual relationships, are in relationships with other white men who are also benefiting from that. So I don't know if people saw the recent ad by Harris's campaign that had Julia Roberts voicing the voiceover of telling women nobody knows who you're voting for. So implying that a woman should go into the ballot to cast her ballot. And, you know, basically when her husband asked, did you make the right choice? She says, oh yeah, but she voted for Harris. And apparently this caused outrage with like, how dare this woman subvert her husband's authority and lie to him, and he's taking care of her and protecting her, and she owes him that vote or something. So so yeah, it's really complicated, right? In terms of the intimate relationships and then the structural relationships. Jennifer, you're muted.
Sorry, I lost my cursor there. Let's go ahead. I think that brings us to another question that we had in the Q&A. And the question's thinking a little bit more specifically about the upcoming election. So how might the future selection of Donald Trump as someone perceived by his gender role to be in control, independent, strong over Kamala Harris being played out by voters, men and women, in the 2024 election? How can Kamala Harris fight against this hegemonic socialization of American society? What might be some ways, and this is me adding this, like what might be some ways in which, if we're thinking about both of your research, right, we're going against hegemonic norms, maybe challenging and having this more empowerment areas for women. How do women do this within a patriarchal environment and society without maybe challenging things too much to being that like against what might be considered and construed as femininity, quote unquote? Sorry, and open for both, because I think it ties into both. And I can pop the question in the chat too, if it's easier to read.
I'll just start if you don't mind. I would say that there's this tipping point, this magic tipping point of 32%. The minute any system gets to that magic tipping point, and just recently looking at the actual makeup of our Congress, for the first time in American history, it's at 30%. Whoa, we're so close. I don't know that we can affront. In other words, I don't think there's anything she can do. I mean, it's baked into the system. But what we can do is we can grow new people that have a very different understanding of what these social structures look like. And I mean, I think we're all exposed to some of the criticisms, right? She laughs. Well, her talking, well, sure. And then it's against the law to talk and laugh in certain countries in this world where they're literally saying women can't talk out loud in public. It's not too far off from me, right? Those two systems are very similar. So I really don't think there's much she can do. I think it's up to us to train more people. And I think all of us sociologists are down to do that. But I don't think that there is much that she can do. By definition, she's stuck.
Yeah, I agree. I think that yeah, she is stuck. And then I do think that it's really out of step with where we've been headed, but it is this backlash, right? So every time women have made big gains or society has made big gains in gender equality, you see this kind of yearning or this backlash to push back. I mean, we saw it in the early 80s as women really went in mass into the labor market. And now we're seeing really a huge rise in women's political voice and empowerment, and we're seeing a backlash. And I do think that for many men who have been raised with this idea that being in control, tough, powerful, that even if they can't, because we know from studies of masculinity that even for men who can't embody or achieve these idealized notions, they still hold them up on a pedestal. They still see them as something important. And so when Donald Trump puts that out there, maybe that gives them some of them a sense of this is still possible, or this still exists out there in a world where they might see that privilege kind of eroding. But I don't think that it can be sustained. The question is, what will be the implications in the short run while we're going through this, right?
Okay. Then another question is, what background factors correlate with women's participation in politics, such as voting, campaign work, office holding? What are some additional factors that you found?
Yeah, so I think that it was kind of surprising for me. Thank you for that question. It's kind of surprising to me how little some of these demographic factors did matter. I mean, they couldn't really explain overall what was happening. Some of the things that we see mattering is things like having more education. The more educated you are, the more you participate, and it matters even more so for women. So education has been a significant driver for women's participation and for everyone. Occupation has been interesting because the more that women are in managerial occupations and high status occupations, that matters a lot. And one that is a depressive factor and creates more gender inequality is religious service attendance. So for example, the more people attend religious services, men tend to increase their political participation, women tend to decrease their political participation. So that actually exacerbates gender inequality. Things like parental responsibilities can sometimes dampen, in some cases, can dampen participation. So for example, in resource demanding, but we also find in some cases being a parent can be a driver toward more participation because you're trying to, have an effect maybe on behalf of your child or your family. So there's kind of a patchwork of different effects. Again, that political interest factor emerges as a really strong factor, and I really want to dig some more into that.
You're on mute, Jennifer, if you were talking.
Sorry about that. Another question kind of takes us a little bit, builds on that, but takes us back to the election cycle and thinking about how we know research is showing us it's been pretty polarized related to gender. In general, men overwhelmingly, or some men overwhelmingly supporting Trump, whereas women are overwhelmingly supporting Harris. What might be some characteristics of the American men who will vote for Harris versus the characteristics of American women who will vote for Trump? How might these trends be explained by hegemony intersecting with social class, race, age, and religiosity? And I know you just kind of brought in some elements of religiosity, but maybe if there's any additional thoughts on those.
You want to start us off, Darby?
I was going to bring it back to hegemonic masculinity. As I did my presentation, I thought, man, there's so much I want to talk about, but I think Dwayne had mentioned this too. Anybody that isn't in that sort of cisgender masculine male, everybody else is subordinated in society. So when we talk about particularly men of color, men that aren't sort of displaying hyper masculinity, all of this is plays into it. So while I haven't researched the actual voting like Catherine has, I would say that anybody that's at risk or feels at risk during this election would probably be more motivated to vote. And again, that would dictate to whom we're going to offer our vote to. So I would just say that anybody that doesn't neatly fall into that aggressive patriarchal category, or feelings like that would actually support their family in terms of, like you said, Dwayne, those children, maybe the sons or even their children, being allowed to live in a privileged life, they'd be less likely to support that. But I think Catherine probably has some more data on actual voting. So thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got it, Darby, there, but it's just there's so many directions to go with that question. And I think that I mean, thinking about our economic system, and Darby, I know you're an expert more in this, is that how many people kind of left out with the trend toward globalization and the movement of good jobs to Mexico. And, there's been a lot of stories on that, and people who just feel left behind. And so there's a lot of focus on kind of the white working class, but also I would say the Black working class has been hit very hard as well. And so whether you turn to Trump and some of those promises as an easy solution to things that when you don't have access to sources of kind of power and status and feeling, worthwhile in society, when demagogues give you something that you can latch on to, we've seen that throughout history, that becomes very appealing. And so the sense that that there are these people who've just really been left behind and are looking for some easy answers. And some people who might just opt out of voting at all because of feeling that it doesn't matter.
Thank you. I had another question. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through the chat. This one's specifically towards Catherine. Some of your research thinking about the gender-linked fate. Have you controlled for issues like feminist identities and feminist consciousness?
So I have to admit the gender-linked fate is not my research. That is research by some colleagues. So Kelsey Kretschmer, who's here at Oregon State, Chris Stout, Leah Rapaner, and then some others. And I would definitely recommend looking at how they have explored that. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what they looked at. They looked at, attitudes about abortion rights. I know they looked at racial group differences and gender-linked fate and how that mattered. So I'd certainly recommend looking at their work. I think just go into Google Scholar and gender-linked fate, and I think you'll get the references.
Yeah. Are there additional areas of thoughts as we're thinking about intersecting systems of oppression in relations to race, class, gender, that may also kind of contribute to the way that we see participation in political engagement and willingness to maybe challenge hegemony in some ways? And it's just kind of an open.
I think bringing it back to what Catherine had said about this sort of disgruntled society, because we know that we're in an economic transition. I mean, we're going to see a massive amount of jobs that are just going to vanish. When I looked at when I looked at wages, so income, working wages, not investments, but working wages, and I looked by race, ethnicity, in all the categories, men earn more than women, males more than females. I'm going to use the exact word from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But I did notice one group where females earn more, and that was in African American, Black Americans. So I think there's something there. What exactly is that? And I know that we have high incarceration rates for African American and Black males. I know Bruce Western's study years ago that said something like between the ages of 18 and 35, if an African American Black student doesn't earn a high school degree, they were 65% likely to be incarcerated. I think these are some of how do you feel if that's your life, right? How do you feel if that's your life? You feel like you're absolutely marginalized, that you're not part of it, and it's not for you. And I think that we're living in a time where these economic grievances, those life grievances, we don't really have a place to park that. And so what do? We're on the internet, if we have access to digital media, and we find our groups, and this is where a lot of this rhetoric is coming from. So it sort of doubles down on those people over there are your enemy, and we're the only people that understand you. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting intersectional conversations that are happening, and how those play out in the polls, I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But I find that to be a really interesting dynamic, that we're really living in a time of an economic downturn. And so anybody that can grab that grievance and politicize it, they're well on their way to getting elected.
I mean, the short answer is yes, the intersectionality matters, right? It matters so much. There was a lot of, I think, disillusionment by racial and ethnic minorities in the US after some of the recent elections. who overwhelmingly support Democratic candidates, who have been, you know, a bulwark of that side, and not always feeling like their concerns rise to the top. And especially seeing that white women are, you know, are still overwhelmingly, well, don't want to say overwhelmingly, but, you know, a majority voting for Republican candidates. So it really adds to those tensions. And at the same time, you've seen for years the economic and, you know, repression by the police for Black men, violence, and, you know, lack of economic opportunities. And so you can understand that they probably feel that neither party is serving them well. So, so I think those are just huge areas of stratification that are going to require a lot of attention.
So thank you very much, Katie, and thank you very much to both Professors Darby Southgate and Katie Bolzendahl for interesting and thought-provoking presentation on gender, patriarchy, and voting patterns in our current cycle. I also want to thank Jennifer Puentes for being an excellent moderator. And of course, behind the scenes was Jarvis Hall. So we're going to continue with our Lightning Talk series. December the 6th, we actually have 2 additional speakers, and they are Alex Wise from the University of California, San Francisco. He's a grad student, and his area of specialty is mass incarceration, substance abuse, drug policy. And we also have Professor Scott Akins from Oregon State University, Department Chair. He's also going to be speaking on the same topic of drug abuse and drug use. So December 6th, mark your calendars, folks. We have a new lightning talk on the theme of drug use and drug abuse. And our moderator on that time will be Manuel Barjas. He is the vice president currently of the PSA. So ultimately then, that presentation is going to examine the current landscape of laws governing illegal substances in the United States. And we know that that has undergone significant transformations. The speakers were reflecting on evolving societal attitudes, public health considerations, and economic factors. The presenters will also examine the shift in punitive approaches characterized by stringent drug prohibition and criminalization. So we look forward to that presentation. And again, we've run out of time, so I want to thank everyone also who took the time to sign up and join. Please spread the word. We are continuing with our Lightning Talk series. And again, it's our prelude to the 2025 conference in San Francisco. So please, as Jarvis reminded you earlier on, get your paper proposals in if you haven't already done so, and also register and pay your membership for the association. So again, thank you all very much and happy Friday. And we will see you all again. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thanks, Jarvis.
Thank you, Darby. Appreciate your talk. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye-bye.